is the Anfield Wrap. Neil Atkinson with Gareth Roberts, Mo Stewart and Dan Morgan to talk about matters pertaining to Liverpool. We're going to do a little bit on the question marks that have been brought up this weekend over restarting the Premier League. Steve Parish's elongated piece that was both in the Sunday Times and thankfully on the Crystal Palace website as well. The responses from on the record, the Brighton CEO. We're going to have a little chat about that. Bits and pieces of information that's come out around sort of the impediments around this and getting into the deeper issues than just the sort of the face value stuff. We're going to have a chat about that. Coming up on a similar theme, we've got a clip from the show I've been working on with Paul Cope and latterly Rory Smith called What's Next. There'll be a clip from that to come as well. That'll be dropped into the middle of this. And then we will have a chat about key games under Jurgen Klopp going right the way back to 2016. To do that, you will notice that the Anfield Wrap this week is not brought to you by The Athletic. Our partnership with them has ceased. That doesn't mean we'll be stopping working with them in any way, shape or form, or the fantastic journalists, nor does it mean you shouldn't consider signing up either. Our relationship with The Athletic remains very, very strong indeed, and it was a pleasure to work with them. But going forward for the foreseeable future, the Anfield Wrap will be brought to you by both the Anfield Wrap and the concept of washing your hands solely. Let's move ourselves into then talk about bits and pieces that emerged this week. Dan Morgan, I sent a lot of information over. I sent over the Steve Parish piece, the response from Barber, the CEO of Brighton, which I was pleased he put his name to. It was nice to see that Steve Parish put the name to it as well. I think it's important from now on, broadly speaking, that people, when they express these views, they don't do them as private briefings. It's not done behind closed doors. But all the way through this, what there has been, I've got the impression from most of the private briefings, with the exception of Tottenham's Champions League panic and the things behind closed doors, is that there's been this huge desire to escape relegation, to ensure that you don't go down. And it's interesting this because, as I've said in the past, there's 20 teams in the league and only one can win the league. So there's got to be other forms of success. Every year, 3 sides do have to go down, but going down is such a blow in the Premier League era.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the whole issue around the fact that the Championship sort of stands alone as its own entity in the English football pyramid, and probably in the European pyramid if we put it into perspective in terms of just how this country's footballing makeup is structured. So I think there's that. I think that it's right that we've got transparency, or we're starting to get transparency from a few league owners and directors and people vested, because on the broader scale of things, it's not helping anyone being kept in the dark. And I understand that, in a more generic sense, you wouldn't want to do things like encourage any kind of mass panic or whatever. But in a footballing sense, I think transparency is massive, because it helps when you have all of these people who just kind of flippantly say, well, just don't bother with football until it's further down the line and until the whole economy is back, or just forget about this season and start again next season. What Steve Parish is telling you is that is fundamentally impossible, because if you do that, you might not have a football club to go back to. We might not have a game to go back to. And you can laugh that off and say it's, that's me being, or football fans or Liverpool fans, whoever, being overly dramatic. But that is the grave and harsh reality. And I think one thing that Steve Parish touches on really well is sort of the off-spurts of what a football club does in terms of the economy. The tax, 33 billion. How much tax was it? It was in the billions.
Yeah, 3 billion.
3 billion, sorry, tax a year. That we talk about funneling money and using money as an ecosystem around the football sphere, but in terms of the economy, it's massive. And then you put on top of that the work the football clubs are doing with communities and stuff, which they've got a lot better over the years. It's absolutely crucial, and their role in society and in this country getting back to some kind of economic footing in due course, whenever that is just as big as everything else.
Gareth, just to start with the Steve Parish piece, he contextualises some stuff. Now, David Conn tweeted a couple of things that challenge a couple of his assertions, or certainly the way in which they're phrased, or the way in which, and this isn't Steve Parish's fault, I don't think necessarily, the way in which, for instance, parachute payments skew a lot of this picture. But we'll put that to one side for a second, because I think that the parachute payments are fascinating and are a massive issue. that skews the Championship. But as Dan's just said there, Parish very much frames what Premier League football clubs do in a community sense, in an elite world leader sense, and simultaneously in a football ecosystem sense. And I was pleased to see him lay it out the way in which he did. As I say, I may not agree with every word or with every piece of phraseology, but it's important to see someone argue that case in the way in which he did.
Yeah, it's been a little bit grim up to this point, I think, the discussion at the top level, the way that, it's been behind closed doors, and then the reporting of it has largely lent on briefings and shady figures and unknown entities and all the rest of it. And even now, that's still going on. It's getting a little bit better in the fact that we've had Crystal Palace and Brighton be represented by people that have actually got a name. But you've still got things like reports in the papers today saying things like 7 or 8 clubs are opposed to neutral venues and things like that. Well, who are they? Just say. I really think the time is now to start having an honest discussion. Everyone, I think, is growing in terms of understanding about how much this could be, put the very future of clubs, leagues, everything else at stake. So let's just have an honest conversation. I think that's what's really needed now. Stuff needs to be put aside, that rivalries and everything else. We hear the phrase over and over and over again, to the point that you want to go and punch an hole in the television, but it is unprecedented times. So let's have an unprecedented conversation on the record, publicly. I said before on one of the shows that if you could almost have, and I know it sounds daft, and it will sound daft to someone who doesn't love football, but we all do, and there's thousands and millions that do as well. And we're all stakeholders in football as well,
yeah.
And we should be communicated with. And I think what would be good is to almost have, like you do in the run-up to an election, have a televised, question time debate, and have all the clubs represented and get them to talk honestly about the challenges that they're facing. Because right now, some of it still feels a little bit disingenuous. Some of it feels like, to me, as a Liverpool fan, all my biases, I look at it and think, but you're only saying this because you could go down. You're actually looking at coronavirus as an opportunity to avoid going down, which is grim. Because on a sporting level, for 3/4 of the season, you've been shite, and something has to give. Between now and whenever football resumes, we know it's not going to be the same. We see it every day. It's reported every day that big crowds are not going to come back together in stadiums for a long, long time. We're all waiting on a vaccine. We know that as well. So therefore, an imperfect solution needs to be agreed upon. And yet you've still got people pushing back, don't want neutral venues, don't want this, don't want that. Well, you've got to agree though, lads, otherwise we just won't have football.
Barber, in his remarks, Mo, there's a couple of things. I'm really pleased that Parish and Barber have both spoken out and are saying stuff on the record. And part of the reason why is, firstly, as Gareth says, for transparency, but there's another reason why, which is I think that there's still something in the psyche of football supporters somewhere which is a little bit forelock tugging, which is all. But there's a flip side of that, which is thinking, well, what'll happen is the rich fellas will bail us out at some point. So we can talk about the fact that there's an issue with club and the pyramids and et cetera,
yeah.
But somewhere in the back of everyone's minds, there's ownerships that are just going to bail us out. And I'm pleased, even though I disagree with Barber's points and with some of his phraseology, we must all be prepared to accept some compromises. That's the point at which, when he finished being very clear about what he thinks, I'd have said, so what actual compromises are you accepting here? Exactly. But that said, I think it's good that you've now got people who own football clubs sort of making clear there isn't going to be some massive bailout from the sky. There's not a Deus Ex Machina ending for the vast majority of clubs here where money is just bestowed, and we've actually tried to come a long way in financial fair play and getting rid of that idea anyway. But I think the more owners and people who run football clubs do actually articulate there is obviously a problem here, I think that should hopefully move the conversation along.
I agree. I think it's all tied in together if you think about it. From the Gareth's idea of the transparency, the whole idea of putting your name to something is that if you believe in something and someone challenges you, then if you're the one who said it, you can go and then challenge that challenge. You can put out exactly why you sing this way, and that can maybe change people's perceptions that it's all about money. But then you also have to think about the massive disconnect between the average football fan and what they think football does and how they think football works and the actual reality. And it's understandable that not everybody is up to speed on the machinations of football finance, because I've been looking into it even just this morning, and it's really confusing. But the point is that you get these situations like you mentioned where people think that there's this idealistic money tree where people can just always get more funds in, so we'll always be able to start again. But if you look into it, a lot of the money's for future things that people are already thinking about. Some of that is already beginning to be allocated now, so you have to think about that now before you can get onto those other stages. But I like Gareth's idea about the debate, because that's probably the quickest and easiest way for everybody to see exactly who is in it for self-interest and who is trying to do things for the good of football. Because yes, neutral venues as an idea, I can understand why some people are upset about it, in terms of Brighton, who would have had 4 big games at home, that they would hope to have more chance of winning than they may have at a neutral venue. Obviously, we've talked about match day revenue and all that stuff that's being missed out on anyway. But the fact is, as you mentioned, there is no perfect solution. There is nothing that we can do where everybody's going to be happy. Everybody has to take some kind of hit. And we have to have a grown-up adult conversation where we say, okay, I realize that this is not a perfect solution, but this is still the best that we're going to be able to do. And so there are some of the arguments where people talk about integrity of those conditions and stuff like that, and how you can say you can't play 29 games in one condition and 9 in another and say it's a season. Well, in an ideal world, no, you can't. But we're not in an ideal world. We're going to have to get to the next stage somehow. So we all have to be able to take on this new burden of an imperfect football, and exactly make sure that football is not a casualty. Because when we're thinking about relegation in particular, that's the real problem here. If you think about coronavirus causing everybody a financial hit, that's just a given. But then when you add relegation on top of it, that could be the double whammy that really does kill Premier League clubs.
I want to go back on that, Gareth, because Paul Barber's comments, and as I say, I think what's important here for us all to get through this is to see things from as many different perspectives as possible. And I can completely understand why Paul Barber and people who are in his scenario are thinking, how on earth do we try to do everything we can to ensure that we don't get relegated? And the reason why is because the Championship's a nightmare. Everyone knows the Championship's a nightmare. It's a nightmare in a sporting sense. It's also, and we'll come on to talk a little more about it, a nightmare in a financial sense for a number of different reasons. And also, no one currently knows what next season's going to look like. Now, I'll come on to that as well in a minute. But you can understand Barber feeling as though, right, I've got to argue our corner here, whether I agree with how he's doing it, or literally with the argument, because I don't think for a second, I actually feel Brighton are more likely to get a result against us in a neutral venue than they are in the Amex if the blood's up and everyone's running around and there's 30,000 people there. I do actually genuinely believe that, but that's a separate point. You can understand why he is and other people are thinking we really, really, really do not want to go down. And we do not want to feel as though we've gone down in a situation where we've been, in one way or another, had off.
Yeah, absolutely, because we hear all the time in normal circumstances, don't we, that managers will tell you quite openly that they target certain games for points. You know, they look at the season as a whole and say, well, that's likely to be winnable. Let's put it mentally in that block. This one, we take a point. This one, well, we're probably going to get beat. And they might not communicate all that to the players. You can bet your bottom dollar they're communicating it to the board and sort of protecting themselves, if you like. You know, Liverpool away, absolutely no chance. Look how good they are. We're not getting points there. So as you say, they might have been looking at it saying, the points we need to survive, we're going to take at home. The fans get behind us. We've got a history of staying up sort of right on the last day or near enough. And, you know, the place will be rocking, the players will be up for it. And maybe they feel right now that, you know, that's being taken away from them. But what is the alternative? The alternative is what France have done. The alternative is just say, OK, that's it. And the teams that are down now. And we just crack on. And, you know, Liverpool awarded the league by a press release. And then we all deal with that, however we deal with that. But, you know, UEFA have said that they want things dealt with on sport and merit. To me, that's that is the best way to do it for some form of sport to be played. We talked at length before about all the good things that could come from sport being played, and I think Steve Parris talks about that as well. And you know, we can overplay it, I think, as well. I mean, there are plenty of people, as I've said on some stuff lately, who don't like football or only passively consume football, and it's not going to lift them as someone who's absolutely obsessed by it. But equally, I just think, like, the governments are talking about some kind of pathway eventually to normality. It's likely to be in stages. We've seen what Ireland have already come out and said, and I imagine it's gonna follow a similar pattern. Football returning in at least some way. The conversation's too dominated by finance for me. I understand why, of course, but like there's little of the emotion there. There's little of the. It would just feel more normal if there was a little bit of football to talk about. If you were able to just say, did you see that goal at the weekend, or did you see that tackle? And those things will still happen behind closed doors. It won't be as good, of course. It won't be. You won't have the crowd. You won't have the crowd spurring you on. There won't be the blood up, like you've just said. Celebrations will be weird because there's no one to go and celebrate with as such. You won't hear the chants, and in some ways that's good because loads of them are shit. But you know what I mean? But so it's a different reality. It's a different football. But I'll take the other football. And also football needs the other football to happen. They won't get all the money back, but they'll get some of the money back. And some of the money is better than none of the money. So I get Paul Barber's arguments to an extent, but then I don't to another extent. Like what's the home advantage of an empty stadium? I think he mentioned about it being familiar, which suggests to me that he's done a bit of research around it, because there is a thing around that psychologically about, you run out and you recognise where you are, you recognise it as it being yours, your home, and that can produce better performances. So I get why he's used that word, but equally everyone's in the same boat. There's even talk that Brighton's ground could be one of the neutral venues. So, so perhaps by default, they just end up with one. I don't know. No one knows. They're still working it all out. But I kind of think instead of constantly having fellas piping up with barriers, have fellas piping up with solutions, have fellas piping up with alternatives. Because as we all keep saying, an imperfect solution has got to be arrived at. And if you just keep saying, I don't know, but what about this? This makes it crap, doesn't it? What about this? This makes it crap, doesn't it? Well, how are we arriving at a place where we can have football if you all just keep doing that?
That's across the board and everything that Robbo said there. I think there is something in, Dan, that there will have to be give. But at the minute, it does seem to me as though, in a very short-termist way, but it's an understandable short-termist way, it seems as though you've got a situation where ultimately Barber's able to rationalise all of this because relegation would be so severe, or it's viewed as being so severe. And it's interesting the David Conn response in the context of this to the Parish. So Parish in his piece says that the Premier League gives out 400 million to the EFL, and David Conn says, well, that's true, but 273 million of that is in parachute payments. So, effectively within there, just shy of 75% is in parachute payments of that money that you're saying that you're giving out. It's 98 million in solidarity payments. And it seems to me, firstly, those parachute payments, because of the way everything's been structured so far, are actually essential. But this is ultimately where I end up on this is it makes sense to be a bit of a crank around a lot of this, and to be a bit of a crank about the Championship, because we've just sort of created that, and we've let this situation, this fire burn for a long period of time, and we've thought, well, maybe it'll get sorted at some point, or maybe it never needs to get sorted. Maybe it's right that the Championship is the maddest league in the world. Maybe we'll just tolerate that. We've tolerated a reality, a genuine madness, where the game that is called by everybody the richest in football happens between sides that finish somewhere between 23rd and 26th in England. We've tolerated all of that. And now it's almost like it's this bit that turns around and bites everyone. It bites Brighton, it bites Brighton, it bites Norwich, it bites West Ham. But it also, in this scenario, because we need the Premier League to function, it's biting the top clubs as well. There's a reason why these clubs are acting as the blockages and the barriers that they are. And it's because the Championship is such a terrifying thing to dip into.
Yeah, completely agree with everything you've said. And the one thing that I would say is that it's a problem of our own creation. And it's never really been addressed as such. So you actually, Gareth talks about a discussion amongst current Premier League clubs, that I'd be banging to that. But I'd also just love to know what a reasonable Premier League owner thinks in terms of going up and coming down, and one who's actually experienced it. Because, I mean, I've always wondered this. I mean, how do you even construct any short-term, mid-term, long-term planning if you're in this scenario of you're coming up, but there's a danger that you might go back down, or vice versa? And I think where that comes into then how you prepare for your club's future over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years as a Premier League owner completely skews the narrative. And no one's ever had a conversation about things like bonuses. You know, you pay a manager $1 million a year and give them 3 million if they avoid relegation. We'll flip it on its head. You know, pay them 3 million a year and give them $1 million if they avoid relegation. Relegation clauses hand all of the money to players, and you can argue that's rightly so, and players deserve power. But relegation clauses are a massive issue in this. You know, you've got players who will not agree to X amount of pay cuts if they go down and are in a relegation, go down with a relegated club and stay there, because A, they feel like they can get a move, and B, they don't want their money affected, so therefore they're then dictating. And this whole problem has been built up since parachute payments became a thing, and no one's, like football in general, no one's ever addressed this game at the top level and gone, well, how do we sort this? Where's a conversation that we can have where this fits into the sphere of society? And I don't think that, I think what you're getting now is that everybody is in a survival mode. Everybody is looking at themselves in a survival sense, as opposed to it being the top tier of English football and saying, well, we can aspire to this. Everyone's sort of looking over the shoulder, going the other way. And that's a big problem now, because it sort of brings the game back to its root form. But in the same time, it still has this massive chasm between the Premier League and League One, and this mad thing in the middle of it.
Gareth, they're all making this noise that we're all right with neutral grounds if no one goes down. And that to me, but I can understand it. I can understand how there might be a block of suddenly what you've done here is there's a scenario where these 7 or 8 clubs who are in direct competition with one another, 3 are going out the trap door under normal circumstances, the other 4 aren't, but can now feel as though, well, if we stand together as a block of 7, for instance, we can say, well, we just don't want relegation. We'll play your games, but there needs to not be relegation because we think it damages the sport and integrity. To me, the flip side of this is I think we'll be lucky, genuinely lucky, and I've done a full show on this with Rory Smith and Paul Cope, which I'm going to do an insert from in a minute. But I think we'll genuinely be lucky to get 38 league games next season. Yeah. The new normal, the length of time this is going to take to fix, genuinely lucky. So the idea that there's no relegation, but you can't say surely there's no promotion, because there's these clubs in the Championship who've done 75% of their season. There's some who are trying to just get a playoff place and see what happens. So that's not even that clean, but just allowing hypothetically to say, we'll bring the top two up. But you can't suddenly start having a 42-game season. Surely. Like that to me just seems absolutely crackers for next season. And also the other thing it does is it just kicks the problem down the road. Because what we do next season, relegating 5? You know what I mean? Like, but the structure means that clubs like Paul Barber's able to say what he says because he feels the structure where the Championship does all this damage, not being in the Premier League does all this damage to his club. He's able to say, well, this is the most rational thing I can do and say, even though we think it all just sounds a bit mad, but he's able to at least feel rational.
Yeah, but it's not rational to say when we've already got a problem with too much football being played, and we've seen that played out over and over again with our own manager. And then your solution to it after losing months of football is let's play more football.
And when you can't guarantee that the virus thing isn't going to worsen, there's not going to be a second or third wave, etc., etc.
There's also the thing. Sorry, Robert. There's also the thing about competitiveness. If you're talking about neutral grounds lessening competitiveness in football, then you can't say that let's just scrap relegation, because you're therefore taking away the whole essence of the competition. Yeah. What are you going to do? Play out friendlies and exhibition games? Yeah,
exactly. It's ridiculous to say on the one hand, there's a threat here to sport and integrity by playing at neutral venues, and then propose no relegation, because that is the ultimate sport and integrity. Like, you've been shit all season, you go down. That's how it works, boys, and that's got to remain. And just saying, okay, well, Leeds can come up then because it'd be harsh on them. Well, what about the playoffs? And and you can keep on going on. It's got to me, replicate what we would normally do as much as possible. And neutral venues make sense because there's an actual rationale behind it, which is they only think, by the way, but they think that it would be really difficult to control large groups of fans turning up around certain grounds. So they're going to pick grounds where they think they can best control that. I mean, you had Joe Anderson last week just sort of hypothesising off the top of his head as though that's a fact. It's not a fact because we've never been here before. Yes, fans go to football matches. Yes, fans sometimes go to grounds knowing they've got no chance of getting in just because they want to gravitate towards it. They want to be by the fans. They want to be by the ground. They want to be by the players that they love. But this is a different situation. This is a lockdown. This is a lockdown and a pandemic which has affected everyone in the country. Someone knows someone who's got it. Someone has someone they love who could get it. Every one of us has made sacrifices around it. And so the assumption that football fans are these like knobheads who just en masse ignore the lockdown and head for whatever ground it's being played at, I think is wrong anyway. And there should be more of a conversation around that. Should be more challenge against that. I was really glad to see Liverpool put the statements out they did. Spirit of Shankly put the statements out they did. And the general reaction to it that there was. Because let's nip that right in the bud before that starts. This isn't football fans' fault. It's a pandemic. Let's stop stop looking for scapegoats all of a sudden. And oh well. But if it wasn't for those pesky fans, we could just play in our own stadium, couldn't we? So yeah, nah. And the scrap and relegation thing. I mean, as you say, it's mad that highly paid, intelligent fellas have gone. That doesn't sound that mad, if we just sneak that one out. That sounds all right because everyone knows the Championship's a bit mad. And so, go ahead. If you do, I will. And then all of a sudden, you've got this little weird cabal of clubs who are up for doing it. And, as far as I understand, they need 14 out of the 20 to agree, to do something, basically. So if you've got 7 clubs who are saying, well, no, we won't do it, then again, like I said before, we're not going to get anywhere then, are we? It's just going to go round in circles. But they've still got this deadline, again, as far as I understand, of the 25th of May to present what it is they're going to do. So they've got to work towards something soon that everyone does agree on.
So there was something I sent round to everyone, and it was in the Daily Mail last week, and I loved it in that it was so Daily Mail, but it was also informative. So it starts off with the headline is revealed, the eye-watering sums football clubs spend across the EFL. And I thought, aye, my eyes are about to be watered. And the Championship is out of control, and I don't think that that's up for dispute or debate. The Championship, because of parachute payments, because of the Premier League pot of gold, because of everything, the Championship's bananas. Apart from that, I'm looking at the League One and League Two sums on this going, yeah, that's all perfectly reasonable. The average wage for a first-team coach in League One is 43 grand a year. My eyes are not watered. No. The average wage for a kitman in League One is 23 grand a year. Well, given the fact that kitmen do more than just wash the kit, my eyes are not watered. The head of finance for a League Two club is on 39 grand a year. That's the average, by the way, so there will be some beneath that. Again, consider me very dry of eye. There is... But the point is that all of this, and this is what I don't understand, why there isn't someone from one of these 7 Premier League clubs, why there hasn't been someone from one of these 7 Premier League clubs, why no one is going, what the fuck are we going to do about the Championship? Because the Premier League's functioning, at least in some way, shape or form, and we can say it's all very self-interested. League One and League Two, to me, seem like the broadly speaking functioning. But you've got right now the Premier League are paying 29 clubs with Premier League TV money. You just approach the point where you may as well just have a PL2, which means that the idea of going down doesn't scare the shit out of absolutely everybody, and you remove one of these massive 2 cliffs.
No, I agree. I think when you looking at that clip, the graphic you sent along, there was only a couple.
I will tweet that out off my Twitter today, by the way. It's the only time I'll ever tweet anything from the Daily Mail. Go on.
It's the only areas where there was a real disparity between 1 and 2 was in the management and, strangely enough, the goalkeeping coach. But I think part of the reason is because when you're in League One, you're not thinking we are one step away from the Premier League because you know how mental the Championship is. So you have to plan to think, okay, chances are we may well be in the same level we are next season. So we have to plan accordingly. We have to be sensible. And it's the same with League Two. I think the Daily Mail, in their graphic, they even tried to do their thing of turning it into pounds per week to make it look more exaggerated. And then League Two player, the average is like £2,000 a week or something. It's like, that's normal. Like, there are lots of people outside of football making loads more than that. So there is, like, you're right in saying that the Premier League, for the most part, does seem to be able to function, and the League One and Two do also seem to function. But the reason I think that the Championship is so mad is because that disparity between what we were saying in League One and League Two and the Premier League is only getting bigger. So teams are getting more and more desperate. And that scenario Dan was talking about earlier, where the players are now able to have the power to say, I'm not signing relegation clauses. That doesn't mean the clubs aren't buying them. The clubs are still buying them anyway, because they feel like they have to. They feel like they can't miss out on a step. So they're making more and more outlandish plans to try to get into the Premier League. And obviously there's only 3 teams who can succeed at any one time. So rather than trying to risk having clubs that do go bankrupt in the middle of a Championship season, you have these parachute payments to say, okay, well, even if you do wildly misstate your budget, we can maybe bail you out a little bit. But what ends up happening is that clubs just include those parachute payments in their original budget. So they're already spending money that they haven't even got. How you solve this question, I'm not 100% sure. I think it goes all the way back to what we were saying before about self-interest and being able to put aside self-interest, because people, it's all really good saying, oh yes, I think we all need to do a little bit less in order to get everyone on a level footing. But that's all well and good when it's not you who's having to put your hand in your pocket. And that's always going to be the problem in football. I think I've noticed some League One and League Two clubs, there has been a bit more solidarity, almost because they are closer to that line of not existing. And when you get down to that breadline, there is a little bit more solidarity. I think of Andy Hull at Atkinson in particular, and the guys at Portsmouth, the relationship that they've had, because they, in the back of the original times when this was all starting, that Portsmouth and Atkinson, there was two of the teams who were thought to be at risk of maybe having caught it during a football match. So there was lots of contact between the two, and I've seen it continue over the time on Twitter. And you do feel like clubs at that level are a little bit more adults about what the reality of their world is, whereas clubs in the Championship still are trying to believe and think above their station, which is always going to cause trouble when you have to have a real adult conversation about what we can do to fix this for everybody, not just to make ourselves as good as we can be.
Last thing on this, Dan, is that it's been within Brighton have been a Premier League club now for 3 or 4 seasons. West Ham have been a Premier League club for God knows how long. Norwich are new and have almost certainly planned in a budgetary sense to actually go back down. And I am fascinated as to what their sort of perception of the current events is within all of this. We know how important the television money is to Bournemouth. To me, it's strange, and maybe it's because it's underreported. Maybe it's because we don't see it or hear it. To me, though, there is an issue, which is that you can only really, it feels, hypocritical is the wrong word, but it feels as though there's a lot of turning a blind eye. There's been a lot of turning a blind eye from Premier League clubs, full stop, but also from those who are sort of directly affected by the threat of relegation. This doesn't feel as though it's something that they're talking about. They're quite happy to grab the Premier League largesse. They're almost quite happy, as Mo says, to budget in part for parachute payments and think about bouncing back. But now this reality does look as though it is closing in a number of different ways, and the way in which things may be going forward. You know, I think that the Premier League ultimately hasn't grasped the nettle of what it's created beneath it, and now it's going to have to. But we could probably do without lectures from people who've chosen not to grasp it.
I thought it was interesting on that David Conn tweet that Nicola Palios had commented underneath.
Very much so.
And basically argued the fact that the money needs to be filtered down the pyramid, more evenly. And
with strict wage control measures in the EFL as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Which goes back to what we said over the last 20 minutes or so. I mean, the parachute concept is that it's sort of I read something today on it from a while back that basically it was another league owner who didn't benefit from parachute payments in the EFL, who basically said that teams who do, it's worth 5 points a season to them. It's basically worth a 5 point head start. So when that goes wrong, i.e. Sunderland, it goes wrong, it goes wrong and then some. It goes wrong with a bang. And I think this whole cliff edge that teams who are in that life sort of live on has got to be addressed in some way, and it's got to start from the top. We know that John Henry isn't a fan of distributing TV money below the top six, and whilst you can see his arguments in terms of the pull of and the gravitas of teams like Liverpool and Manchester United in the English scale, there has to be some compromise in terms of how we financially structure these leagues better, because we can sit here and say there has to, but literally now there has to. We're in the midst. There is no escaping this. This isn't trivial anymore. This isn't something we can just have a conversation about and all sit around and say, God, that should change. Who wants a bevy? Yeah, so I'll move on to the next thing. Like, you literally have to sit down and say this has to change now. And that has to be with governments as well. Governments have to take a form of vested interest in football. It's a massive financial and economic part of their own budget. So they should be, we can have wider conversations about governments.
And local economies, Liverpool's nighttime economy is an example, Dan.
Well, exactly, yeah. Yeah, exactly. And council budgets and everything else. And we can have a big conversation about this government in particular and what they don't do. But it's in their interests, like it's in football's interests. It's in everyone's interests now to have a full and frank conversation about how we make this survival work, because everyone's in survival mode, as I said before. It's not about looking up now, it's about looking down. And everyone has to therefore make sure that we don't go over the cliff collectively.
Excellent stuff. Dan segued me very, very nicely. For a number of weeks, me and Paul Cope have been talking about what's next, about how to finish this football season, but also about the issues that all this has thrown open and made you aware of. We've been doing it on Tour Player. Very, very pleased to have done it. It's been good work, very thorough. And this week we brought Rory Smith in, who also complimented the thoroughness of the work in taking the piss out of me in spreadsheets. But that's allowed. And in fact, actively encouraged. Robbo once bought me a mug about how I love spreadsheets. So we can all bear that in mind. But anyway, here is an extended clip from that conversation between me, Paul, and Rory this week. That was behind Tour Player. It's us talking about the importance of the football ecosystem and the transfer fees that Premier League clubs pay. Last little thing there then is to factor in the transfer window bits and pieces. You mentioned about that we hadn't thought of, I think, to be frank, the idea that for a lot of clubs, the Champions League, the transfer window is almost the primary mover and driver and that a lot of this stuff, it's sides from Belgium going to France, it's players from Austria going to Germany, and at some point then getting a move from Germany to Spain or Bayern Munich, or if they're really good, Bayern Munich, or Spain or England at some sort of point. But that ultimately there does probably therefore need to be provision for 30 days, say, to allow for there to be player movement. I mean, if we're saying that that's what a lot of the leagues under the top 5 leagues need, then we do need to allow provision for it.
You have to have it. You can't. Yeah, again, you can't have a one-size-fits-all solution. So what works for England to get their money won't work for Belgium. Although I think the reality is the Belgian league, and probably 2 or 3 others, France certainly, are as reliant on England getting their TV money as anything else happening. That if they need the Premier League TV deals. The Premier League in the last 5 years, I got these figures from the CIES Football Observatory, and they haven't actually yet been published by the New York Times. So this, if you beat my desk to the punch, this could be your exclusive. Which is possible. The Premier League in the last 5 years has spent £1 billion on players just from France. That's £1 billion gone into the French football economy from the Premier League TV deal. It's another $1 billion has gone to Juve, Sporting Lisbon, Barcelona, Dortmund, and someone else between them. 5 teams, £1 billion to the 5 biggest kind of selling clubs in Europe to the Premier League. European football rests on Premier League money to a large extent. And that money then filters down, as you say, from Belgium out to Africa or bits of South America or Scandinavia or wherever. Those clubs need that money, so you do have to factor in a transfer window. I wonder whether you could open it as a pre-registration window before the season is finished. So you could say, right, say they start late June and they aim to finish early August this season. And then you have the European window and the domestic cup window. You could run it maybe from the second half of July and all of August. You have the transfer window open, which should give everybody enough time to do their business. And before the seasons are finished, you can sign players, but you obviously can't register them. That's easy. The transfer window is just a registration window. So you have your squad that's carried over from March for this season, but you allow clubs to do business before that. By that stage, they'll all know whether they're getting the TV money or not. They'll have some accurate idea of how much they're losing in terms of matchday revenue and how much they can recoup through selling streaming rights or whatever. At that point, they should be able to do business, and you can keep that money flowing, because the golden rule of recessions is the ones at the top ride it out and the ones at the bottom suffer. And I think, to be honest, football, as much as I have a vested interest in what happens in England, I have a vested interest in what happens in Germany and Italy and Spain and France. I think football has a responsibility to recognise that the needs of clubs below that level are different, and that what they need is that money to keep flowing. You can't seize. It's easy to say. I've seen fans say this as well. They'll just have to not sign anybody this summer. And you think, well, if you're Liverpool, that's great. Just all right. Maybe the squad's a bit knackered next year, but you've still got arguably the best team in the world currently. For Man City, fantastic, right? Fernandinho has to do another year. What a terrible shame you've got to have this wonderful Brazilian midfielder go for another year. If you're Charleroi or, I don't know, Linz or someone like that, or some Vitória Guimarães, that screws you completely, because your whole budget is based on the fact that you've got this one or two players who you can sell for 30 million quid to England or Spain. It means the ones at the top come out of it probably in better financial shape. They've not spent any money, and the ones at the bottom suffer. So you have to factor in a transfer window, but it doesn't have to be it certainly doesn't have to be bloody July and August. That's not in the Bible, and it doesn't have to function quite as we expect it to. It could overlap with the end of one season, the start of the other, and part of it could just be a pre-registration window.
Something else that we hadn't acknowledged, Paul, was the idea that you can do more than one thing at once. It isn't as though, to use a very Liverpool-based example, Michael Edwards has got to watch all the games, pay attention to all the games, and doesn't get to negotiate deals around the same time. It's an excellent point, really, from Rory, that we can actually get the games played in some divisions whilst doing the bit of the procedure that needs to happen simultaneously. In others, it isn't as though these things are mutually exclusive. Transfers and football matches have happened at the same time in the past, and they can happen again.
Yeah, I think there's two crucial bits in what Rory's just been saying then. And one is a point we've not recognised. I didn't know those figures are incredible. And it makes perfect sense as soon as you say about how much the British TV money, Premier League TV money, funds the rest of Europe. And again, is another sort of strike against the argument of just void it because it's simple. That's I think the void it because it's simple argument is the one that infuriates me the most. I'll happily listen to a void it and it's complex conversation, but no one's put that forward yet that I've seen.
Void it and here is why voiding is easier than freezing is a legitimate point of view to hold. It's not one I agree with, but it's if you can explain it and back it up with an argument, then fine. But Paul's right. Void because it's simple is moronic.
Well, that's another. I can imagine. I was trying to goad Piers Morgan into coming onto the show and get Twitter to help. I didn't think it would work. I was bored at 10:30 at night a couple of nights ago.
I was very twitchy about it, Paul. I'm not going to lie to you.
Sorry.
I was very twitchy about it, Paul. I'm not going to lie to you. Go on.
I was thinking about you. I was expecting to get a message in the middle of it all.
Played it cool, Paul. Played it cool.
What do you do? I know. I was bored. But I could just imagine that's just one of a number of points you could make to that argument that makes the person trying to say it's a simple, good solution just squirm in their seat. Because what is the counterpoint to that? And then on the other point that's very much worth making as well is, as soon as you started saying about running the two things simultaneously, my brain did what lots of people do, which is come up with the problems with that. And the first thing to acknowledge is, yes, there is no perfect solution. Going back to what we said at the start, it's like the overarching principles of this. There is no perfect solution. What's the best we can do? Because we can't do it the way we did before. But let's acknowledge as well, as you said, it's not like the way it was before was set in stone anyway. We've changed that. a number of times in our lifetimes. So we can change it to try and make it work. And we just have to put up with because one of the things that popped into my head was, you're Adam Lallana, you pre-register for Leicester and you've got 4 more games to play for Liverpool. What happens then? But that's just an issue. That's always going to be the case.
And it happens all the time anyway. It's partly that, I mean, whether one of the things they could do is they could kind of get rid of this. I'm not even sure if it's a rule, but this thing about the kind of the old idea of tapping up. They could say, look, we're going to declare what's the word?
Moratorium.
A moratorium on that, because I mean everyone does it anyway. And the thing that I find really staggering is this idea that people are acting as though like the conversations around transfers only happen during the transfer window. But if you're Adam Lallana, you probably know who you're signing for already, or you did until all this happened. You'd have had a pretty clear idea of what was going on with your future.
Yeah.
From about February or March, you'd have known roughly which teams were in for you, how much they were prepared to pay for you. Which you might even have had conversations with managers. You might have still hoped that Liverpool would extend your contract for another year or whatever, but you would have an idea. So I don't think the main objection, even as I was saying, it was that can you guarantee that players would give their all for their current club?
Mm.
And I'm not sure you could, but I'm not sure you can do that anyway, particularly in the last 2 months of the season. In the same way as people have said, oh, why should players have to risk their health to play dead rubbers? And all right, the risk is higher now because there is a virus going around that wasn't going around before. But ultimately, for most teams in April and May, all they're playing is dead rubbers anyway. So all the players are doing is risking their health whilst playing dead rubbers.
Welcome back. Really enjoyed that with Rory and Paul. Hope it was illuminating for you as well, and the shows themselves have been terrific. Part of a lot of excellent stuff that we've been doing behind the paywall across the last few weeks, since the cessation of football occurred. What's next has been something that, as I say, we're going to be doing another one this week to go out next weekend, and we've been doing other stuff as well. The Agony Hour has been very popular. I'm absolutely amazed it's not closed the business, but people are enjoying it and finding it entertaining, which is nice, and some people are finding it useful, which is terrifying. And the other stuff that's been worked on includes finding a footy fix. Robbo, you got another one of them coming up this week. There've been really interesting ways to re-examine old documentaries about the game.
Yeah, we've enjoyed doing it. Obviously, idea was floated around in light of what we're going through, and then as time's gone on, with the little panel that we've got now set in stone, myself, Mo, Kev Walsh, and Connor Phillips. And like it's been a good balance, I think, and we've done some different stuff as well. So it's not solely been Liverpool. We've done stuff, and we've done older stuff, newer stuff, and it's funny as well. I think loads of it actually, even though it's old stuff, it feeds into, like I was thinking then as we were talking about the Championship, about the QPR one we did, about and about them them gambling on QPR getting into the Premier League. And so for anyone who enjoyed the conversation we just had, go and watch that, and you're getting this unique behind the scenes look at how much of a gamble it is, but also the riches on offer when they come out the other side and why they're doing that. So yeah, it's been good, and another one will be recorded this week, and we'll keep on going. And plus, if you are watching them, you get to see my biggest blooper reel moments of my time at the Anfield Rock.
Yeah,
honestly,
one of my favourite shows I've ever been involved in, genuinely. But no, in all honesty, the show it's kind of added a bit of structure to my life. In fact, it's the only bit of structure I have in my life right now. So I'm very pleased for that reason. But I mean, I love watching documentaries. I love watching football. So therefore, I'm going to love watching football documentaries. But Robbo's right. It's not just about, a lot of them are stuff that I've seen before, so you can compare how you felt about it then to how you feel about it now with hindsight, how things have changed. But some of the ones I haven't seen before, it's kind of like, it's almost like a time capsule of what football was like at that time. Like we did the One Night in May. That was the last one we did. And because it just so happened that the quirk of the show that we were watching had adverts in it, so it very much timestamps it, and you just see like little things like sky idents and haircuts, and even some of the like foods and stuff that it were, and you just think that wasn't that long ago, but it feels like ages ago, and you just kind of get more of a sense of the passing of time. But like I say, through the prism of watching great footballs. So
what's this blooper, lad?
You don't
What's
see
this
it?
blooper? I haven't
Honestly,
seen it.
honestly,
You have to watch it, lad.
It's worth watching. It's worth watching it for.
I bought myself a new seat. Like because I'm doing so much work from home. Let fill in the gaps.
It's honestly, I've said a lot of things are worth £5, £7, or £10 a month on the Anfield wrap. Let me be crystal clear. Seeing this is literally worth the solo payments. Even if you've never signed up for anything, it is worth the solo payments. It is absolutely glorious. One day I will do an hour-long show dissecting each frame and its individual genius. Anyway, all of that is available to sign up through 4Tour Player, through the website. We've talked about it before, but now's a good time. And certainly if we are all beginning to get ready for football to come back, let's keep a watching brief on that. Throughout the course of these Mondays, we've been doing a chat about the key games under Klopp and what you can take from them. We're going to do 3 to finish the 15-16 season. The 4-0 against Everton, the 3-0 against Valencia, and the 3-1 defeat, not Valencia, Villarreal, and the 3-1 defeat against Sevilla. I mean, Gareth, first and foremost, battering Everton at Anfield has become quite the Klopp tradition. But this one now, when you look back on it, I actually think more than anything, it's marked by the terrible tackle, and it is a terrible tackle, and the injury to Origi, because it really does curtail his undoubted momentum. And there's loads. Divok's just had an unbelievable 18 months of his life, and he's probably going to end up walking away from Liverpool whenever he does, with a Champions League winner's medal and a league winner's medal. So you've got to be really careful how you phrase this. But at that time, you did feel like you could plan around Divock being Liverpool's number 9, if not literally the Liverpool number 9 into the next season, then very much fighting aggressively to become Liverpool's number 9. And then he gets that injury, and he really, I don't think, has quite been the same player since.
Yeah, and very quickly it was clear the manager felt like he had something to work with Divock, and I remember us going to Dortmund away where he favours Divock up front there and to Sturridge, which was massive at the time. But also as well, how quickly he got to work on him in terms of, he got him to beef up a bit. He got him in the gym and things like that. And, he definitely felt like, here is a player I could work with. And the fact that he did that with him, I think was massive for Divock himself, in terms of his confidence went through the roof. And you saw the player that we thought we were signing before we had all the stuff around, in the worst team in France.
The really young lad who gets to play for Belgium in the World Cup when he's 19. It's brilliant.
And, that it was an absolutely awful tackle, absolute donkey of a tackle. And, to have Evertonians in some way make it out it was a good thing, some of the Evertonians, and, him himself sort of like, grabbing the badge on the shirt and all this kind of stuff when he's walking off, you're absolute knob. I mean, like, it's so far away from being what a professional footballer, should be doing. It's untrue. And, I'm all in favour, obviously, and talk about a lot about sort of solid challenges and getting stuck in and all that kind of stuff. But, there's a line and he's pole vaulted over it, never mind jumped over it or stepped over it. Yeah, it was absolutely awful. But the other thing about this game as well is it was Klopp's first derby in charge. Obviously Brendan goes after the one at Goodison Park. And I remember being a little bit worried about, where would Klopp be on derbies? Because I'm always a little bit like that with any manager, really, because obviously it's huge to us. It's huge in the city and all the rest of it. And, there's Jurgen coming in from Germany. I'm not saying he's not going to get it. There's huge rivalries in Germany. Of course, he's going to get it. But it's just how he manages it, how he goes at it. And I remember him doing quite a bit of media in the build-up, actually. He's doing all like little round tables for the Echo and things like that with like, Blue Nose legends and things like that. And they're all banging on about, what the derby meant to them. And then Jurgen's just sort of sat there. And I just thought, well, how's this going to play out? And how it played out as we absolutely battered them. Played them off the park, didn't give them a kick of the ball. And, obviously everyone remembers the scoreline and the song that was born from this game and all that kind of stuff. But also as well, like, Everton did have some moments early on and we defended pretty well, which I think sort of, goes a little bit unforgotten now because, why would you remember that bit? You remember the good bits, you remember the goal, and as I say, you remember the song, the ball, they hardly touched the ball. But yeah, it was a great way to start a derby, and it's gone on ever since, hasn't it? And he's still playing with our minds now. I mean, that lineup he put out this season for the derby, you know, I'm sure, you know, you all had similar conversations, like you're walking up to the ground going, what's he doing? What's he doing with the team here? It's a derby. And then you're walking away and it was 5-2 and you go, it's boss him, isn't he? Just gets it. What a manager.
This was actually my first derby, just by a weird quirk of the fact that I'd never been able to get a ticket up to that point in the 10, 12 years I've been in Liverpool. But I was super excited. And the thing that I hadn't remembered until I looked back at the thing you sent through, Neil, was how on paper that was a strong Everton team. If you think about it, under Martinez, they were able to put out some really good performances. So you're not going into it assuming it's going to be 4-0, but the way that the game panned out, yeah, they were quite good early on. But once we got to the point where Funes Mori has to make that tackle, and I say has to make that tackle because Divock had been embarrassing him up until that point in the game. It was up until that point Everton thought they still had a chance. After that, they weren't really interested in trying to win the game. They were just trying to stop us from doing what we ended up doing, which is dominating it, getting a handsome score, and not all being very happy on the way home. But scaling back to Divock a minute, that's still going to be the high watermark for me. I don't know if it's because that was one of the first times I saw him in the flesh, but despite all of his achievements since then, when you ask me what was the best I ever saw Divock Origi play, it's still going to be that day. He was the guy who we were getting excited about whenever he got the ball. It was him. And when you think about the context of where he is now, where it's almost comic, the way some people are praising him now, that it just seems like it can't be only 4 years ago that happened. But so much has happened and changed for him in his life in those 4 years.
Everton lose Funes Mori. Let's be quite clear about his sending off. They actually had an FA Cup semi-final against Manchester United at the weekend that he then couldn't play in. Stones goes off injured on the hour mark. He gets on the pitch for the semi-final, but if I remember rightly, he just never looks fit. But they had no other centre-halves. I mean, it was that'll play Besic there. Jagielka gets on the pitch for the game against Manchester United, and I don't think he's quite right either, to be honest with you, Dan. It is there's an element there of just desert from an Evertonian point of view from off the back of the Funes Mori challenge. But it's one of the last shockers I can remember, to be quite honest with you. I think Klopp that season is a terrible one against West Brom, which is one of the things that precipitates us going to the Kop after the game. But one of the reasons that challenge sticks out in the memory is because there aren't actually that many challenges like that now across all the Premier League football. When you see one, you are amazed.
Yeah, and like Gareth says, it's the unprofessionalism in the reaction as well. And look, let's balance this out a bit. I've seen Steven Gerrard do Gary Naismith, one of the worst tackles that you could imagine, and that really could have hurt him. So I'm not gonna stand on that pedestal and bemoan the fact that it's Everton against Liverpool. But it's the fact that he owns it, really, and it's the sort of, not to try and dig into mentalities too much, but it's the whole psyche around it of this will please Evertonians. And a lot of Evertonians were disgusted with him on the night, which needs to point out as well. Not only because of what he's done, but because, like you say, he's lessened their chances in an FA Cup semi-final by the result of just completely losing his head. In terms of the game, though, and I think what contributes to that is the fact that their 4 goals scored at perfect times. Like, they couldn't be scored at any better times in a football match. It actually, in a weird way, reminded me a little bit of Dortmund at home in terms of the goal times, in terms of, you sort of getting up to the halfway mark and then you get the goal that you need, and then you sort of go from there. And yeah, it's a funny one. It's sort of a lost derby for me because it doesn't carry anything. And if you know what I mean, it's sort of a lost season. I take most points about Everton's team and Martinez, but it was very much an Everton side after 13-14. Who was struggling, and I think that sort of lessens the occasion as much as an Merseyside derby occasion can be lessened. I think the thing in this season from general is that when you look back now, and one of the things that stands out is Klopp saying that these are a group of players he can work with, and at the time everyone being quite flippant about it and saying, oh yeah, come on, you're just going to get rid of these as soon as you can. But he's actually quite genuine about the fact, and he gives all of them the opportunity to forge a Liverpool career. Some take it, some, like Mamadou Sakho, self-implode. And when you look around at that team, you've got the likes of Kolo Touré still, Jose Enrique still at Liverpool, I think, Joe Allen, Nathaniel Klein's first choice right back. it is night and day from what we're used to now under Jurgen Klopp, to the point where you forget actually it's him who's manager. So it is a funny season in that sense. I mean, Divok's a good example in that at any point in the season you can sort of pin your badge on who you hope is up front. At this point, it's very much Origi, but earlier in the season, it feels like there's a Danny Ings conversation. And then before he gets injured, and then the Sturridge is still around, and you're wondering if Daniel can do it, and there's all of these different things at play.
Sturridge comes alive for him. He scores in this game against Everton, Mo, but the next game I want to talk about is the one against Villarreal. We're 1-0 down to a late goal there, Gaff. We win 3-0 on aggregate. There's an early on goal that just evens the tie. It goes 1-1 at that point, and it's a classic European. The next goal is going to be crucial in quite a way. And it's Sturridge who gets it. We're going to go on and talk about the final against Sevilla as well. But Sturridge scores actually some key goals in this run-in. The ones against Villarreal and Sevilla couldn't be more key. Making it 2-0 at that stage of the game. Again, perfect time, 63 minutes on the clock. Liverpool make it 2-0. And Villarreal just look very much second best. But Daniel does come to the fore.
He does. And he'll probably be sitting there thinking about that game, thinking he should have had a hat-trick. Because he should have had a hat-trick. If you think about it, the first one, it was a shot, yes, an own goal. If he finishes it like he knows he should, it's a goal. The assist for Alana for the third goal, he should have scored that. And he'll be sitting there thinking, I should have had a hat-trick, because that was the form he was in at that point. Those striker predatory instincts were at their sharpest, I think, at that point, because he knew that he had to rely on them as much, because he wasn't able to rely on his physical attributes that he had even 2 seasons before that. And I think if you notice about the second goal, the one that is his in particular, the thing about it is how quickly he is alive to the chance, because he just kind of takes a little step away from the defender to allow the ball to come into him. And then he turns quicker than everyone else. He's got his finish away. Yes, it goes off the keeper and off the post and what have you, but he knows it. And also the other thing, that celebration. Did you see that celebration? How absolutely mad he was going. And yes, it's a semi-final, second leg, all the way for a European final. But at this point in his Liverpool career, everyone thought Daniel Sturridge was too cool for school still. And there was a bit of a perception that, oh yeah, he doesn't really understand. He doesn't really connect in the way, which, as we all know now, was actually rubbish. It's just he was very harsh on himself on the pitch, and he didn't let his emotions show in that way. But I think you see it in that goal celebration, and they give the slow. I watched one of the BT highlights afterwards, and they give a super slow-mo of him. And he's literally, every part of his body is absolutely joyous because he's been able to get Liverpool to a European final. And yes, you can say, as Dan was saying, that he was in a fight for that number 9 shirt that he hadn't been in previous last 2 seasons, and maybe that's where some of the emotion came from. But I just think it's when that season kind of gets lost a little bit because of what's come after it. But at that point, Sturridge, I think, was probably at his most productive in terms of the amount of minutes we got him on the pitch and how good he was in those minutes.
Yeah, he's not the player he was in 13-14, Gareth. He's not as mobile. The injury that happens at the start of the following season on England duties happened. But he does step up, and I'm intrigued by this. It's one of the things that when I look back on, it's sort of not forgotten as such, but sort of half taken for granted. You know, he gets that goal against Everton after the injury to Origi. There is this goal against Villarreal when he gets the start and is integral to all 3 goals and could have another, as Mo says. Then there's the Sevilla game to sort of segue a little bit into that. You know, you get to really see the importance of Sturridge and arguably Lallana as well at the end of the 15-16 campaign. Both of them are absolutely massive, and I think there was a feeling that Daniel was at times a little bit too cool, and that disappears, I think, over that European run. To me, he looked like a man who was absolutely desperate and prepared to show all of his talent and do as much work as he could to get Liverpool a European trophy. It just doesn't happen. Yeah,
I think he's maybe one of those players where it's in his psyche that he needs to be challenged. You know, he needs to be written off to an extent, and then you get the "I'll show you" type thing, and I think we got that from him. Because if you remember, like, Klopp was like incredibly publicly harsh with him in terms of questioning his attitude around injuries. You know, publicly questioning basically, you know, some player. He said something along the lines of some players will play through them and some players don't, or Daniel needs to understand what an injury is. Along those lines, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not far off. And like you imagine, like, you know, as a professional footballer, to have that thrown at you from your manager in public as well. You know, you can imagine conversations like that happen on training grounds or in the dressing room, and they stay there. But he went public with that, and I remember thinking, wow, that's, you know, that's a big one. That, but I think Daniel's done that, or did that a lot during his time at Liverpool. There was loads of times where it was sort of like, that's it now, he's going to go, or he's not good enough, or he's got too many injuries, and then he'd come back and do bits and have a little spell. I mean, I always loved the spell when Suarez was banned, and you know, he came back early from injury. He wasn't fit, and he came back and he was contributing, he was scoring winners, he was all over the pitch. I remember Aston Villa away, he was absolutely brilliant. But not only that, he was like, there was a point in that game where I remember he popped up at right back, and I was like, go ahead. This is, and you know, this was a lad that, as I say, had come back early from injury. So I think there is that thing with him where, you know, he's spurred on by criticism and spurred on to prove a point. And look, his ability was never ever in doubt, really, was it? It was just how you get it out of him at times. I mean, we're going to come on to talk about the final, and you know, I won't dwell on that because we're going to do that in a minute. But you know, the goal he scores there. The goal he scores there is one of the great forgotten Liverpool goals. It's an absolutely brilliant goal. But that in Villarreal, I just wanted to say as well, I think in general this European run, look, it ends in disappointment, obviously, and that was a bit grim, and it left us all feeling a bit empty when we came away from that ground in Switzerland. But when you look back now, I think we said this before when we've been doing this type of content, massive for the sort of the journey of Liverpool and where we are now, because in 7 months we were in two finals under Klopp, and you know, this was our first European final since 2007, and I think you know, you can kind of forget about that. You know, 9 years without a European final for a club that prides itself on being in them and contributing so well to European competition. So you know, it was massive that we did what we did, and I think this Villarreal game as well, bit like the Dortmund game. The Dortmund game came around an anniversary, Hillsborough anniversary, didn't it? And I think that added to the sort of emotions in the ground. This came after the verdict from the inquest, yet. So again, there was like emotions were running high, and I think in a way that helped in terms of what you got in the ground and what you got before the game as well. You know, said before many times, and it is a thing. I remember the pieces. I remember writing the pieces. I remember reacting to comments on Twitter. A lot of the sort of Liverpool old guard, if you like, that have been going the match a long, long time, were saying it's done. Like, we're not gonna see these European nights again. We're not going to experience those atmospheres again. You can't recreate what we once had. And I think while they enjoyed the younger lads making the flags and the banners, making the effort, I think some of those fellas thought, you're not getting that back, and we got it back. This season we're talking about here, we got it back. It was great against Dortmund, and it was great against Villarreal as well. And you know, we lose that first leg, but there was the huge difference collectively in mentality, and that we all went, get this back. We can beat these. It wasn't like, oh shit, we're done. It was, these boys can do it, and they ran. You know, as well as being brilliant on the night and scoring great goals, they ran their arses off as well. You know, the effort in midfield, and I can remember Villarreal, I think quite early. One of them gets sent, doesn't he? One of their players gets sent, but I think quite early they go with the tactic of trying to kick us a bit, and you know, it didn't work, and we end up thumping them.
Dan, Gareth's already moved towards the final. One of the things about the final is that we absolutely batter Sevilla in the first half. We just don't score enough goals, and I think that's when you look back at the game and when you read about the game, think about the game and watch highlights, or if you can bear it, the whole of the game. Sevilla can't live with Liverpool in that first 45 minutes, but we do not make it 2. And Sturridge actually misses an opportunity to make it 2. That's not to say he gets a goal that is part 1 of his job done, but he misses an opportunity to make it 2 within there just before the break. And you said before about this Liverpool team this season, one of the things it does well is it scores goals at the right time. On this game, the final, it doesn't score goals at the right time, and it very much manages to concede them at the wrong time.
Yeah, and I think as well, because I have watched the game back since, I think Emery and Sevilla need a bit of credit, because not only are they versed in Europa League finals by this point, but they don't panic at 1-0. You know, they're very much. And look, we can have a different conversation if they're coming up against the 17-18 Liverpool, for example, who can blow them away with 4 goals in 20 minutes. But the rhetoric really around this side wasn't that. So the manner in which they just remain patient and are able to, I think what they do that night, I think what Sevilla do rather than what Liverpool don't, is they exploit massively where Liverpool's flaws are and where Klopp's work is. And we, let's have it right. I don't want to dig anyone out, but it's probably one of the worst European Cup final performances in Liverpool's history, owing to Alberto Moreno that night. And it's not surprising because he's got one in him at that point. So is the goalkeeper. But it's exposed, and it's exposed on the biggest scale, and it's exposed on the biggest stage. I mean, just to talk about the season again, in general, you talk about the Villarreal semi-final. I'll always remember that game for Emre Can. And that's the night I believed that Emre Can was going to be a powerhouse for Liverpool, a powerhouse of a Liverpool midfielder. Because, we were desperate to get him on the pitch. I think he was still injured. And we managed to strap his ankle up and get him on. And B, he absolutely runs the show. And those perceptions change over the years. And it's interesting. It interests me now looking back that we lose 2 finals that season, but still we're very much accepting, like Gareth says, that this is the very, very start of something, to the point where you can not even say this is part of the process. You just have to say, we wait and see what this brings next, because it's that early. I mean, I remember being in Kiev with you, Neil, and that felt more part of the process than Sevilla, if you like. That felt more part of the journey. And that's what, 2 years down the line, that you can sort of chart these building blocks when you go on these journeys. And I think we sort of went on a bit of one with Benitez, but the minute Klopp comes in, everyone sort of gets it, and everyone sort of clicks back into place. Of you're not talking a Gerard Houllier 5-year plan. You're saying that this has to happen in front of us over an indefinite period of time, and that final just sort of becomes another step to that. It just becomes a final.
Looking at it now, Mo, there's a lot of grown-ups on the bench is one of my takeaways from it. And that's what I'm almost a little bit surprised by. There's a lot of grown-ups, and I remember at the time, Henderson is trying to get his fitness back. He may not have been fit enough. Lucas is on the bench. And in the end, the actual subs that, it's Origi, Allen and Benteke that come on. And by the time Origi and Benteke are coming on, it really does just sort of feel as though, it is just lash the forwards on and hope that something clicks. It's interesting to me that Firmino is one of the ones he takes off. Which you'd be stunned by now if you were looking for a key goal to pull yourself back around in a game. But again, they scored immediately after Origi comes on for Firmino, which, again, is when I talk about the timing of their goals. But it does sort of feel in hindsight as though a little bit more Henderson, a little bit more Lucas would have been no bad thing. And I think the side misses Sakho at this point, who's been very, very good in this European run.
Oh no, I agree. I'm trying to think back to the memories I had at the time, as opposed to thinking back to how I reflect on it. And I do remember how massive the Sakho news was, and it wasn't just because of how he was playing, but I think it just felt like we were building a momentum in that European team. We were starting to think about some of the memories of 05 and other more recent European runs, and I think 05 was the touchstone because it was an imperfect team at that point. It was a team that only a few months ago we were watching performances under Rodgers, or we really didn't know what we were going to get, and we really didn't know how to fix it. And yet somehow this new man had come in and he'd shined up these, well, I don't want to call them turds, but you know what I mean. He'd made these so-called mediocre players into something a little bit more coherent, and he was the glue that was going to take us to the next level. And obviously in the final, it doesn't happen. What almost does happen is you get a little bit of Cinderella turning back into, normal. And, chariots turning into pumpkins. Because you have players who have been, for the most part, able to maybe minimize their weaknesses. And like, when you get a team who are so used to European finals as Sevilla, they're going to go straight for them. And you had Moreno, but also looking back at the goals, Lovren's not having his greatest game. The point where Moreno is taken for the first goal inside 15 seconds. Coutinho was obviously, he's coming across late to cover. Mignolet doesn't come out. So there's a catalogue of errors that go wrong. And to me, I remember at that point thinking that rather than this being the start of a journey with Klopp, I was thinking that this is the end of a journey for a lot of those players, because this was off the back of the other final you mentioned against Manchester City, we went to penalties, and the semi-final against Villa the year before, where we were saying a lot of these players get to the crunch and then they can't get over the hump. We need new blood to get over the hump. And I think Klopp kind of came to that conclusion later than maybe some of us did, but for me, definitely, I feel like that game in particular felt like the line in the sand for a lot of that squad.
That's weird, isn't it, Gareth? Is that it's a funny season to go all the way through and think about Klopp in the context of it now, because I think we all felt as though there was the possibility of something building, that it wouldn't take. I think we all feel a lot better. It's interesting what Dan said before about transfers. When he first comes in, I think there was a lot of the idea of, a lot of people were saying he's going to get rid of 15 of these, etc., etc. And he came in, he showed the players a great deal of respect and a great deal of work, and he does remove people over a period of time. But it is interesting to me that it actually felt we end the season just knowing a lot more about what he needs to do, and how surgical he sort of needs to be and will be. And I think that's the great success of the season, is that he very much gets things out of most of these players and gets them on a journey that firstly gets us Champions League football, and then some disappear by the wayside once we've got Champions League football, then towards challenging, and some disappear by the wayside, then challenging, and then winning. And that, it's interesting that you can actually see that journey now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of finals or season ends and things like that can feel a little bit sort of shit or bust at times. And, I see the graphic again the other day. Obviously, I knew the situation, but just seeing the graphic rammed it home around, Liverpool title challenges, and, you come close and fall off a cliff. Liverpool did that so many times. With this, I think I remember, going away from the game, and the conversations, despite losing a final and losing a second final, were fairly positive. There were, of course, there were gripes and groans, and I think even then people were mentioning Klopp's record in finals. I think there was some beef in terms of Klopp trying to rev up the crowd when people were like, well, hang on, you should be making decisions on the pitch there, mate. And we weren't sort of fully there. Maybe that was one of the few times Klopp's called that wrong, if you like, in terms of trying to rev up crowds and get people going. The timing of when he did it in that final, I think everyone was I remember a bit of debate around that, about whether that was right, and people not being happy about it. But it seems mad now, because here we are now talking about it, and you're like, what? Why were people griping about that? Well, they were though. But we come away. I think it's shown you the journey that on mentality, what we always talk about as well, in terms of in that game. We're right to give the opposition and the opposition manager loads of credit, because I don't think anyone's won the UEFA Cup more than them, have they? I think I'm right in saying.
Yeah. Certainly since it's been the Europa League.
Yeah. So, they knew what they were doing, and they were well versed in what they were doing, and they came out second half with a bit between the teeth. And Liverpool couldn't really live with it. I think, first half, we have a penalty shout, don't we? And we don't get it. And then there's a bit of controversy around one of their goals second half. And I think Liverpool collectively start to feel a little bit sorry for themselves. And there wasn't that will that you get now, where it's like, okay, things aren't going our way, but we can still make them go our way. It was, things aren't going our way, so let's accept they're not going our way, and we're going to meekly surrender and fall away, and that's that. But I remember coming away and us saying, okay, we haven't got European football, but actually we could use that maybe to our advantage here. Thankfully, that's how it turned out.
It is indeed how it turns out. Thank you very much this week to Gareth, to Mo, and to Dan Morgan. If you're thinking about signing up to the Anfield Wrap, please, now would be a good time. But it's okay if not. I understand everyone's got things going on at the minute. It's been a long show as well, this week, but it's been a good one. We got into a lot of stuff and a lot of issues. More of this to come, more of it to come across Talk Player, more of it to come across all the video stuff, indeed. Thank you very much to everyone. Have a lovely week.